Hey friends, it's a quick step. So before we get started, I do have to give a small celebration that Step Back just hit 50,000 subscribers. That's a huge deal. I asked some people what they wanted to do to celebrate, and one comment said, send a picture of my feet, and the other one I liked a lot more, which said, go get 50,000 more. I like that answer, so if you have any friends you haven't shown Step Back to, do it now. But today, we are going to do a short, interesting video about Ramadan. Ramadan began last week, as you guys are seeing this. It is a month-long holiday and the holiest holiday of the Islamic calendar. So let's talk a little bit about what it's about and demystify what this most serious and deep of holidays for our Muslim friends is. So let's begin with what Ramadan is. It is a month of the Islamic calendar, the 9th month of the Islamic calendar's year, which is based on lunar cycles rather than sun cycles, which I think is really interesting. The actual beginning of Ramadan is officially happening when the first crescent moon is observed after the new moon on Ramadan, which I think is really cool. So there are a number of activities that must be done during Ramadan. That is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, so it is very, very mandatory, with some exceptions. First of all, fasting, which I think is probably the one you're most familiar with. Muslims, at least those who are not sick, child, pregnant, or through other means like diabetic and things like that, anybody who does not fit all those qualifications cannot eat or drink during the day. So they eat 2 meals during this holiday, one that is before the sun comes up and another one after the sun goes down. This has been a thing since the life of Muhammad, so it's a very ancient tradition. This also means that Ramadan, when it falls in the summertime, can get very hard and can vary a lot in different places. Luckily, one of the coolest things I think I've learned from my Muslim friends is that there's an app for that. They actually, because of the sort of varying times of different prayer times, some Muslims have these apps that actually tell them the time when all the various prayers happen, and they can only eat before the morning prayer and after the evening prayer, which that's cool, but it does mean that during Ramadan, in some places and some times, the times that you can eat and drink are very troublesome. For example, Muslims who live in countries like Iceland or in very northern regions like Norway, in the summertime, sometimes that means you can only break your fast for about 2 hours a day because there's 22 hours of sunlight. And then at the same time, it would be the winter time in Australia, and Muslims celebrating Ramadan there would only need to fast for 11 hours. So you can see it varies quite a bit. They even have worked out a legal decision because, of course, Islam is a very legalistic and very scholarly religion, so they've worked out every contingency in many of these cases. One of them is, if you live in the Arctic in periods where there is eternal day or eternal night, you actually are supposed to use the daylight and sunset times of Mecca, which I think is kind of a cool addition to talk about. But Ramadan isn't just about fasting. It's about prayer. It's about reflection. It's about giving to your community. There's an extra prayer done at Ishtar, which is the evening prayers for Muslims. Muslims are encouraged to read the Quran in its entirety over the month to reflect on it and think more about it. So if you think about the month as a period of abstaining from worldly pleasures with the fasting, reading the Quran, it's a period of trying to purify the body and soul. It's sort of a yearly check-in to sort of push the reset button and, not let life get in the way for a little while. There's also a big community aspect. There is something called the zakat in the Muslim 5 pillars, which is that a percentage of your income has to go to charity to help the poor. There's another type of giving. The Arabic word is actually escaping me right now, but it is extra giving on top of the zakat, and it's still good. It's a good deed, and during Ramadan, Muslims are encouraged to do more good deeds, and things like giving to charity will be, in the eyes of God, rewarded more if you do it during Ramadan. So oftentimes, Muslims will save like large donations to charity and big events of community giving for Ramadan. But why do Muslims choose this month of the year in order to celebrate Ramadan? They believe that it's a holy month because it is a month in which the revelations of the Quran were passed down to Muhammad. But what I also learned is that several other holy texts Muslims also believe were passed down from heaven on Ramadan, including the Psalms, the Gospels, the Torah, and even a lost piece of scripture that Muslims believe in called the Scrolls of Abraham. Scholars on the history of Islam think that the observation of Ramadan goes all the way back to pre-Islamic Syrian churches. There's a bit of scholarship that suspects that these pre-Islamic Syrian churches were probably where a lot of Islam's ideas were incubated and developed. But of course, you could probably guess that some Muslim scholars and academics would push back against this interpretation. You know, it's worth mentioning. It's interesting. And as I mentioned, Ramadan's observation is one of the pillars of Islam. It is mandatory for Muslims who are adults, who are not ill, who are not diabetic, who are not breastfeeding, who are not menstruating, and not traveling, chronically ill, or pregnant. Now, the month of Ramadan, because it's based on lunar cycles, lasts about 29 to 30 days. The time when Ramadan ends is when the first new moon after that crescent moon is observed. It has to be observed visually, but the default, the longest it can go is 30 days in case, like, you know, it's cloudy or something and no one can see the moon. The holiest night of Ramadan is, and I apologize for my Arabic pronunciation here, but Laylat al-Qadr, or roughly translated the Night of Power. And this is an evening that is commemorating the time when the first revelations of the Quran were passed down to Muhammad. And of course, what fast is complete without a giant feast at the end of it? At the sighting of the first new moon, you have something called Eid al-Fitr, which is a huge meal with all of your family and a big celebration, you know, Eid Mubarak, like time to celebrate. So yeah, I think it's an interesting, fascinating holiday. I find Islam endlessly fascinating as a religion. And I just wanted to, you know, give a big shout out to this religion, and for any of my Muslim viewers, of course, Ramadan Mubarak. Like, I hope that you have a great and fulfilling time. And yeah, I'll see you guys next week.